Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Bulgaria joined Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was meant to unite all the southern Slavs, but the Bulgarians, they were somehow never included. Although they were also Slavic and still consider themselves to be Slavic, at least from a linguistic point of view, there is no deny. And Macedonians, well, or Northern Macedonians, they are considered to be Bulgarians by many Bulgarians, and yet they ended up in a union with Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, Herzegovina and Montenegro. Initially, Yugoslavia should have three main peoples, the Croats, the Serbs and the Bulgarians, which comes to a surprise. The Catholic and Orthodox churches should be equal, and this Yugoslavia would have a king. There are various problems with this first initial plan. First of all, the Slovenes, they were just somehow forgotten. Then you also have the Bosnians who were forgotten, and with the Bosnians or the Bosniaks comes also Islam, which is not mentioned at all. And then we also have the problem with the king. Yeah, who would be that king? That's the big question. Serbia was already independent, but so was Bulgaria, and depending on who would be the king, it would create massive issues of favoritism and also inequality. Moreover, with the spring of nations, a so-called Illyrian movement became famous among Croatian politicians, and then you also had Aurel Popovici, who was an advocate for the United States of Greater Austria, but well, his idea was never really done, because as we all know, Austria-Hungary dissolved after World War I. Bad luck for him, I guess. Well, actually no. Another guy, the Slovene Anton Korosec, I think it's pronounced, advocated for a tri-monarchy. Austria-Hungary should become Austria-Hungary Yugoslavia, which never happened as well. The Allies attempted to persuade Bulgaria to join the Allies by having Serbia cede larger parts of Macedonia to Bulgaria in exchange for gaining Bosnia-Herzegovina and even an outlet to the sea. In the Treaty of London, it was decided that it should be done in 1915. But the Serbian government, as well as the Bulgarian government, they had many disagreements about it. And not only that, but the Bulgarians were on completely different sides than Britain and Serbia. However, by the end of the war, we had some interesting evolutions happening. Many Bulgarian politicians became interested in joining Yugoslavia. And alongside with these people, we had even the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Alexander Stamboliski, was the most important pro-Yugoslav figure in Bulgaria. One initial plan considered by the Serbian leadership was to accept the Treaty of London in 1915, in which Serbia would then gain Bosnia-Herzegovina, Slavonia and southern Dalmatia, and cede Macedonia to Bulgaria, and then constitute a Yugoslav state between Serbia and Bulgaria. But as we all know, this also never came into existence. But what if all of that changed? What if Bulgaria joined Yugoslavia? In 1916, the Serbian parliament in exile, remember we are here in the World War I period, decided in favor of the creation of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. But this time, the Serbs, Croats, Bulgarians and the Slovenes, they were included in the preamble. Bulgaria was beaten in World War I and the Tsar had to abdicate. Moreover, at the same time, the Bulgarian Prime Minister was in favor of joining Yugoslavia, as I mentioned. The Treaty of London from 1915 would be accepted in some modified way. Bulgaria would gain several parts of Macedonia, while Serbia would annex Vojvodina, except for some parts, Bosnia and Montenegro, and Croatia would become the Triune Kingdom, while Slovenia would just become Slovenia. Yugoslavia would also not be a centralized kingdom, but adopt many ideas of politicians that advocated for an United States of Austria. Every part of Yugoslavia would become very autonomous, and the hypothetical king could place dukes in favor of his policies, or even bring back certain dynasties which would appeal to certain Croatian factions, and it would lead to overall stability. The main problem will, however, be the question who will rule over all of Yugoslavia. Well, in here the answer in theory is very easy, but then the practical part is different. The thing is that the Bulgarian Tsar abdicated and his son took over the throne. But this was, not commonplace and common sense to do, because the Ottoman, the Austrian and the German monarchies, they didn't survive the end of World War I. It is not far-fetched to declare that with the pressure of the Allies, of Yugoslavia and of internal Bulgarian politicians such as Alexander Stamboliski, the Tsar's son might have to abandon Bulgaria or even accept a lower rank, which he would definitely not do. This new, bigger Yugoslavia would have a lot of trouble, first of all with Bulgaria, and Bulgaria would thus get a lot of attention. Another advantage the Allies and the world would see with this Yugoslavia is that it would be big enough to survive on its own, but small enough to not have imperial ambitions, such as France or Britain or Germany. That's why the Allies also favored the creation of Czechoslovakia, and why they also reluctantly allowed Poland to annex their eastern territories, the Kresge, from the Soviet Union. Yugoslavia would also stay with the Allies, but have a bad diplomatic relationship with Italy, of course, especially when Mussolini would take power. Hungary was officially a monarchy until the end of World War II, but Horthy acted as a regent for an absent monarch, so the same could apply to Bulgaria. And even so, Yugoslavia would need to send some troops in there, but not much would then happen, and after some time the Bulgarians would actually accept it, seeing how they would have not these bad issues as Germany would have, for instance, or the Turks. Other internal troubles, such as with alienated Croatians or Macedonians who wanted to join Bulgaria like in OTL, these issues, they wouldn't exist or be very, very minor issues. And over time, Yugoslavia could become more stable than even in OTL. Now, the thing is that World War II will be an interesting period, but I don't see Yugoslavia joining Germany or the Axis powers, because their bad diplomatic relations with Italy would relatively negatively influence them for joining the Axis, and instead Yugoslavia could show their disagreement with Italian actions in Albania. And once Germany would attack Poland and then France, Yugoslavia could side step by step with the Allies, trying to threaten the Italians from not doing similar actions and that they would be ready to fight. Well, the Italians, they would still feel arrogant and still confident enough to attack Yugoslavia at one point, but fail miserably. Instead of a Greek fiasco, we could get a Yugoslav fiasco. And without Bulgaria as a German ally, Germany would use more resources in fighting this monster version of Yugoslavia, but still manage to beat Yugoslavia, and we would still get someone like Ante Pavelic in Croatian puppet state in power. The Bulgarian puppet would also be carved out, while Serbia would be divided between the puppets, between Hungary, and get occupied partially by Germany. In OTL, the communists would have a very strong presence in Bulgaria and have a lot of support in there. Thus, with Bulgaria becoming part of Yugoslavia, Bulgaria might become the center of Yugoslav communism. And we might get that to see partisans fighting in Bulgaria instead of all over Yugoslavia, but they would still fight in Yugoslavia, of course. And with Tito as their leader, well, it's very sure that he would get more troops and aid from the Soviets, first in Bulgaria, because that's also where the Soviet invasion would first of all come. And also with the rest of the Axis resources being used in Yugoslavia, but still Yugoslavia being more powerful, I believe that the German and Italians, they would waste, of course, then more resources, and that the Western allies, they would have even access to Yugoslavia and even probably help them to free themselves. So we would get Yugoslavia freeing themselves up, but supported by the two sides. One from the western side and one side from the eastern side. This leads us to the Cold War period. And what do we get? Well, Albania might fall under Western influence and be forced to pay war reparations to Yugoslavia, because they actually would attack also with the Italians Yugoslavia, and they would also be seen as someone who should be punished as well. Yugoslavia could perhaps even repatriate many Kosovo Albanians back to Albania after seeing what happened to the Germans in Poland and Czechoslovakia. The Allies would turn a blind eye to it as they had more important matters to deal with. The Croatians would suffer as well, and their reputation would be damaged for the coming years, while Bulgaria would become the communist Yugoslavia. Why? Well, as communist base for Yugoslavia, they would free up most of Bulgaria and other parts of Yugoslavia. But the rest of Yugoslavia would want to continue with their monarchical system, while the communists, they would of course disagree to it. We would see a civil war and also a Korean War-like situation in Yugoslavia, where both parties would just agree then later on to a ceasefire, but World War III, well, it would definitely not happen in there. Bulgaria would officially be called the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, while the rest of Yugoslavia would continue to be the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, or Western Yugoslavia. An alternate monarch would try to bring all the ethnicities together after 10 years, and the Croatians, they would slowly but surely not become the black sheep anymore. Efforts would be made to get Bulgaria back into the Union, and with a common enemy, that being communism, a monarch, and having the support of the West, this version of Yugoslavia could not only be more stable, but exist for a longer time, because it would not only rely on one figure, it would rely on these circumstances. After the Cold War, we might see the reunification of both Yugoslavias, just at the same time as Germany. Politically, this Yugoslavia would be a decentralized monarchy, adapt a Belgium-like system, be pro-West, and be a member of the European Union and also the NATO. And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.